Another day here at the AXA Training Centre. A little bit later than usual, but no less combative for it. I think everybody was in a feisty mood today at the press conference, including Arne Slot. There were a few jokes at the beginning, as is becoming customary, but there were a few messages he was very keen to get out there as well. We spoke about the weather, we spoke about aggression, we spoke about set pieces and the tough battle that's going to be up ahead against Everton. He also answered my question. Maybe didn't like all of it, but still gave me something good to go on. You'll hear my thoughts on that and everything else when we get back to the lab. Now, after my lovely little tour, we are back in the sanctity of my lab to talk about Arne Slot, to talk about Everton and everything he had to say about the Blues ahead of tomorrow's big Merseyside Derby. And there was plenty to go on and plenty of things that you could kind of draw out if you happen to look between the lines. And between the lines is exactly where I like to be. So without any further ado, let's get into it. Before we go into my top 3 takeaways, let's get all the admin out of the way. The injuries, the contracts. With the contracts, there was a complete stonewalling of any questions. He was asked about Virgil van Dijk and he didn't really talk about it, so we don't need to dwell on that. I'm sure there'll be another question next week that we can go into more detail on. Injury-wise, there was no really big news there. Alisson is still not fit enough to play in the derby. Chiesa and Jota are close. Connor, Ibu and Costas are not close. So I think with the Girona game and with Southampton in the League Cup coming in the other side of this derby, we might start to see either of Jota or Chiesa for those games. We'll probably see a start for Harvey Elliott in that as well if he doesn't come off the bench against Everton, which I suspect he might do. But we've got all that out of the way now. Let's dive into my top 3 takeaways. And number 1, calm Arne is key for Kelleher. Now, he was asked obviously about Caoimhim Kelleher and the mistake he made towards the end of the game that was vital in the Newcastle's equalising goal late on, and how disappointed he would be. It's understandable and kind of expected that after a result-changing error from one of his players, the manager's going to come out and defend him. But I liked what he said. I liked the line he said where he saved us 1 point rather than, as a lot of people thought, he cost us 2. And the reason he said that was because of the chance at 1-0 where Joe Gomez makes a mistake and he comes in and saves it. He says that we don't know what would have happened, but he kind of intimated that 2-0 down in that situation would have been a tough mountain to climb back from. And I think he's right. But it kind of highlighted something else that he went on to say, in as much as there's been plenty of occasions over the course of this last run of games where Kelleher has bailed out his teammates after they've made mistakes. The most notable of all being the Virgil van Dijk, where he gave the chance to Kevin De Bruyne against Manchester City. But there have been other examples. In fact, you could say there's been an example in at least one of the last 4 or 5 games. But the problem is, when you're a goalkeeper, it's very hard for anyone else to repay that favour when you make a mistake, because you are literally the last line of defence. And Arne was very keen to stress that, and I think it's a really important point for all of us to take on board when we're talking about goalkeepers and mistakes. And it's a strange situation for Kelleher. He's been in the headlines more than he's ever been in his short career, and yes, he's had praise before. I think when the League Cup game where he won the final back in 2022, but this is the first time that anyone's ever really talked about him being maybe keeping him in when Alisson is fit, and really heaping lots of praise on him. And then obviously after a game like this is one area where he's had the opposite. But as I said, having such a calm and measured manager who's never been too high or never been too low, regardless of how everyone's talking about him, is going to do him a world of good. Because we have to remember, like, Kelleher may be 26 years old, but he's still very much in the early stages of his career. He's played less than 80 first-team games for Liverpool and none for anyone else out on loan. So he is still learning, he's still kind of experiencing things for the first time. And as I say, having a manager who not only backs him, but is willing to be as level-headed as possible is really going to do him some good. Top takeaway number 2, play hard, but play smart. Now, Arne was asked about what he expected from Everton ahead of this game, and it was very key what the messaging was, because he mentioned the word aggression and aggressive, I think 4 or 5 times. He mentioned hard-working as well. But he said that obviously you wanted to be aggressive, but you have to be smart about it. And he was very smart himself in the way that he answered this, because he went back to the game against Everton last season and he said he was kind of surprised because Liverpool had all the ball in the first half and yet they conceded 10 fouls to Everton's 1. Now, obviously, he said this in the context of saying that his team can't give away stupid fouls, but it could also be read that he was perhaps questioning the way that game was officiated, because we have seen this plenty of times in the past 3 or 4 years of Liverpool where we've had all of the ball and yet referees have decided that we are the ones conceding fouls and our opponents aren't doing very many of them as well. So just putting that into the spotlight is not the worst idea he's ever had, let's say. Now, he was asked, obviously, about how he would approach the game, and he mentioned the fact that, once again, he said he wanted to be aggressive, he wanted to be front foot, and that kind of flew in the face of one of my theories around the Newcastle game, because Liverpool had started that game very slowly, and on commentary it was kind of said that Liverpool aren't at it, they weren't doing what they wanted to do. I wondered whether or not that was an intentional tactic because of all of the fervour of Newcastle. Maybe they wanted to dampen down the crowd in order to then be able to play their football. But I'm kind of glad that that wasn't the case because, frankly, it didn't work against Newcastle and I wouldn't expect it to work against Everton. So hearing that Liverpool are planning to be aggressive and front foot and smart was all music to my ears. Top takeaway number 3, everybody's talking about set pieces. Now, this was another instance where someone asked a question that I was planning to answer because I did wonder whether or not the importance of set pieces had been stressed by Arne Slot and his coaching side ahead of this game for multiple reasons. One, Liverpool have conceded 3 set-piece goals in their last 3 away games, albeit the one against Southampton was from a Liverpool corner. It still counts as the set-piece goal conceded. And Everton, all 4 of their goals against Wolves came from set-piece situations, and they had another goal disallowed that would have also been from a set-piece situation. So it's a very massive part of their game plan. So Arne was asked about all of this, and his answer was kind of funny because it kind of sounded a bit of a yada answer, in as much as, 6 or 7 years ago, no one was talking about set pieces. Now everybody talks about set pieces like they're really important, and I mean, he's right to a certain extent, but I do think it's a consequence of where we are right now in the Premier League. We've seen this season how tight the league is, how many of the lesser teams, the so-called teams at the bottom, who've been able to cause problems for the team towards the top. And you can say that's a consequence of the finances of all of the teams and the way that the Premier League money is spread out. But we're in a situation now where there really are no easy games. Something that may have been a cliche before, but is absolutely the truth now. And because of that, you have to be on your mettle, and set pieces become even more important because they can be the difference in a tight game. So it was glad to hear that it was something, despite him being pushing back a little bit on the idea of everyone talking about them now, is clearly something that they are working on. He also mentioned the fact that as well, they're going to be concentrating on defending set pieces. They have some players who can cause some problems of their own from set pieces, so they're going to be concentrating on attacking from them as well. But considering what we're hearing about the weather, potential for 65-mile-an-hour winds, which he said he wasn't taking into consideration right now, but I dare say he'll be looking out the window when he's on the bus on the way to the ground to see exactly what it's like. And when you have those kind of winds and those kind of conditions, set pieces become even more important. I think most of us remember the hurricane that happened down in Bournemouth at the League Cup game last season, and how that was a real test for the goalkeeper and the defence, because any corners just put into a certain part of the air would just fly in towards the goal. So if we have a situation like that, then obviously Everton's one real attacking threat becomes an even bigger threat. But as he said, we can make a cause of that as well. So we'll have to wait and see exactly how important that battleground set pieces end up being. So again, this is a situation where my A question and my B question were covered, but I still had another one in my pocket, and I put it to Arne here.
Hi Arne, you mentioned Ryan is 1 yellow card away from suspension. In the last 3 games, he's had a yellow card in the first half of games. I don't know whether or not his the fear of a second yellow played a part in his substitution at Newcastle, and how do you speak to your players when, as you mentioned, sometimes the referee's decisions don't go their way, but there's about finding that line of lawful aggression in games?
We don't talk about the referee decisions with the players, especially not after the game. That's of no use. Sometimes they're in favour of you, sometimes they're maybe against you, so there's no use of talking about that, not over here and not with the players. when it comes to Ryan, the reason why I took him off, because he played every single game he played. It was like almost impossible for me to take him off because he played so well. You were like, oh, if I take him off now, what happens with the team then? It's a bit exaggerated, but you know what I mean. And this game, especially first half wasn't his best, like for the whole team. First 10 minutes as a team we started to play better, he as well. But this was a game where I felt like maybe someone else can do as a minimum the same, and that will rest him a bit then as well, because he's played so many games already. And that's why we chose to, we were I think also 2-1 down at that moment, so it was maybe a smart decision to go even more offensive with Curtis as an attacking midfielder in the role as a number 6. So there were again a few factors that made us taking him off, but he will start tomorrow.
So as you can see there, Arne really focused in on the refereeing part of my question, which wasn't what I intended and probably was a mistake from me because of how I worded it. I intended to really highlight the kind of lawful aggression part rather than the referee part. But to be honest, the only reason I even mentioned the referees is because of how he'd answered some of the previous questions. Not only, as I mentioned before, about the refereeing in the last Everton game, but also he questioned some of the decisions to give McAllister's yellow card up at Newcastle, which means that he's suspended from the game. So he kind of opened the door to that referee question, so I kind of see if I could lead him up to it, but no, he slammed that door shut. But he still did give me something interesting to go on, and the brief of the question was more about Ryan Gravenberch and how he dealt with him and the reason behind his substitution early on in the game against Newcastle. And he did stress something that quite a few people have been speaking about, the fact that he has been playing a lot of minutes. These are the first minutes in the Premier League this season that Ryan didn't play, and he played every minute so far in all the Champions League games. So after 2 seasons where he hasn't really played a lot, either for Liverpool or for Bayern Munich, it probably was beginning to play on Arne Slot's mind that this is more than he's been used to in recent times and puts him at risk of injury. But the reasons behind this were also fascinating, because he mentioned that he's been playing so well that there's been times where he's been thinking, well, if I take him off, what happens to the team? And this is a bigger point really, because it kind of illuminates 2 separate elements. Number one, how he feels about the other potential options in that position, namely Wataru Endo and Tyler Morton. It was obvious that bringing Curtis Jones in was seen as a statement of maybe not necessarily trusting those two to play in the game, particularly a game like the one against Newcastle. Now, Arne mentioned the fact that Liverpool were 2-1 down at the point, so bringing Curtis Jones in to play as the deeper midfielder, a more offensive player, kind of made sense in the context. But I think it's really easy to see that he doesn't fully trust Endo or Morton to play what would have been half an hour. We've seen Endo play 5-10 minute cameos towards the end of the game, and we've seen Tyler play in some of the lesser competitions, the League Cup. But the fiery heat at St James's Park in a game that Liverpool were desperate to win, he didn't really want to go with any of those. He didn't really want to veer away from his trusted 4 midfielders. Now, that may stretch to 5 when Harvey Elliott is fit and firing and able to really rotate in. But what that says to me is, do not be surprised if there are some changes amongst the midfield stocks, either in January or come summertime. I don't think that there's enough options there for Arne Slot to really be comfortable with bringing Ryan Gravenberch out of the team as much as maybe he should be. You could argue that the 3 yellow cards early on in the game that he got, particularly the one I would say against Manchester City, could have been a consequence of maybe some tiredness there, and it's fair to say that Newcastle wasn't his best game. But despite all of that, and maybe because of what we know about McAllister's yellow card, Slot did tell me that he will start. So if anyone was thinking that maybe there would be some kind of funkiness going on against Everton, not a bit of it. Ryan Gravenberch starts. I think Dom Szoboszlai starts. I think Curtis Jones starts as well. As I said, we may see Harvey Elliott at some point. We may even see Wataru Endo at some point if we're leading going into the final 10 minutes or so. But the starting midfield looks pretty set for this game, which is probably a good thing for Liverpool, because those 3 are the kind of midfielders who you'd expect to have all of the qualities necessary to get this job done. So there you have it. my top 3 takeaways from Arne Slot's pre-match press conference ahead of the game against Everton. A game that I'm expecting to be a very, very tough and very tight game. I'm sure Arne Slot is expecting exactly the same. It's going to be plenty of aggression on show. I'm hoping that the weather doesn't make itself part of the story, but if all goes to plan, I still expect Liverpool to grace Goodison Park with one more win and to come away from there with 3 points and leaving those Evertonians feeling a little bit blue, or a little bit more blue. Thank you as ever for watching this video. I want to remind you, first of all, as always, you can go to my Substack. There will be a match report dropping later on Saturday after the game. I will be in attendance in the press box. I've been warned about the Goodison Park press box that it's something from the 1960s, so I'll be interested to see exactly how good or bad it is. Something else to let you know about, I've started writing a column for This Is Anfield website. My first one is about Johnny Heitinger, obviously the former Everton player who's now a Liverpool coach. You can go to This Is Anfield's website to read all about that. And hey, there's going to be another one of these ahead of the Girona game, so we'll see you then.